Hi, everyone. We will get started here in just a minute. We have a number of people who are registered today, so we will get started once everyone gets in. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started. This meeting is being recorded. So welcome to Comprehensive Planning with Climate in Mind. My name is Carrie Carney. I'm the Executive Director of 1000 Friends of Iowa. This is the next in a series of webinars that's co-sponsored and co-hosted by the Des Moines Area MPO, the Great Plains Institute, Iowa APA, and 1000 Friends of Iowa. These webinars are designed for city staff and planners on a variety of topics around climate and sustainability for communities. So welcome very much for being here. There is a chat function that folks can make comments in the chat, but if you do have questions, please go ahead and put your questions in the question and answer section that you'll see probably either at the bottom toolbar or across the top, however it might be set up on your computer. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and get started. And I'm gonna introduce our first speaker is Allison Van Pelt. Allison is with the Des Moines Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. She is a senior planner there. And Allison is going to kick things off talking a little bit about what, comprehensive planning in general, and then the SMART planning principles. So Allison, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, of course we get to play the game of, do we see the slides? And I'm gonna go over here and do presenter. And we'll swap. Everything good there? You can see my normal slide, not the presenter view and all that, Jess?
You're good.
Thank you. So yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Allison Van Pelt. I'm a senior planner here at the Des Moines Area MPO, and I'm also the APA Climate Champion for the state of Iowa. So part of that role is helping put together groups like this and discussions like this, and then fostering discussions between communities and all across the state. So if there's something that your community needs from a planning perspective, especially at the national level, please by all means reach out, and hopefully we'll kind of spark some conversation today. So of course, it's one of my favorite holidays. So happy Groundhog Day. My second favorite holiday is Valentine's Day. That's just a couple of days away as well. But today, we did learn that we are going to have 6 more weeks of winter, and it is extremely cold out there today. So hopefully you all are warm and comfortable at home or in your office. And really just thank you again for being here. So like Carrie said, I'm going to start off with some of the what and why of comprehensive planning. So some of you might not be in the state of Iowa. A lot of this can be extrapolated out from just the state of Iowa, but because I'm based here, I use some of our legal and planning principles and things like that. So I'll expand on that as well. But really here in the state of Iowa, the Iowa Supreme Court it says that legally comprehensive plans direct the use and development of property by dividing it into potential districts according to present and potential uses. We also know that there are functions of a comprehensive plan, right? So these provide the common framework and continuity, that justification for decision making when you get into your land use and zoning and codes and things like that. We try to balance the interests within this and engage citizens in how they'd like to see the future. But also we protect those public investments and those valued resources, shape the appearance of our community, and then of course, always promote economic development. And we also know that comprehensive plans also provide a great opportunity put together a vision and goals for the future for your community. And so I think it would be remiss if we didn't include climate in these things. As you can see here, the trend lines on a lot of climate issues continue to go up. And we think about comprehensive planning. We do think about these public investments and the economic development, and really, how our community is going to look into the future. And so I don't think we can really look away from the number of disasters that are happening across the nation, right here in Iowa and things like that. Just in the last couple of years, we've had 2 derechos. Besides in the academic setting, I had never heard the word derecho until it came sweeping across our state in August 2020, and then we had even one in December 2021. And so these things are starting to add up, and it's costing our cities, whether it's, building back afterwards, becoming more resilient and putting in these adaptation pieces, but it is costing our city. So when we are putting together a vision and goals for the future, it would behoove our cities and our, the citizens themselves to start integrating these things in. And so a lot of what I do at the MPO here in Des Moines is really we look at this integrated planning. And one of the questions that I get asked most often is, shouldn't a climate plan be separate from your comprehensive plan? And I think that in a lot of cases that might work well if you have the staff capacity, if you have the budget to do 2 completely different planning processes and have 2 different documents, but that's not going to work for every community across Iowa, across the nation. And so a lot of communities are going to look at how they can bring these pieces together. And so that's one of the things we'll be looking at today. Really, another piece would be codifying these things. So codifying the fact that we do need to be resilient to some of our disasters, that we do deal with these extreme weather events, and we do need to make sure that our neighborhoods and our community are prepared for these. And so building those in, again, to your land use maps and your zoning maps and your codes and things like that, and codifying this drive to create more resilient communities. Another great piece about integrated planning is continuity. Just looking at a couple cities around our area, we have housing plans, we have hazard mitigation plans, we have economic development plans, watershed management plans. We really do have all these different plans that do touch on each other, but they really are in a lot of ways disconnected. And so if we can integrate things together, we really do create a more linear process, or a more linear document, and a more understandable process for development and how we want to continue in the future. And another great piece of it is the collaboration piece. I didn't actually mean to have the 4 C's here, but that's how it turned out. But collaboration and comprehensive planning is really trying to tap into our whole community. What do we all want to do together? What are our issues? And so I think that there's a great way here, or a great space here, to open up and broaden who is collaborating in these processes. We'll talk about a little bit more about that later. But really, when we integrate these things in, it becomes a more comprehensive plan. We're looking at more of the aspects and really kind of honing in on that definition of comprehensive, which is looking at all or nearly all aspects of something. And then the other feature, I am a sales shopper. Actually, everything I'm wearing today was on sale at some point. And so when you do integrate these things in, you can kind of think of it as a buy one, get one free. Yes, it might be a little bit more effort. Yes, you might have to dig a little bit more. It might take a couple extra weeks or a couple extra conversations and things like that. But having those 2, having climate and comprehensive planning merged together can really kind of be a 2 birds with 1 stone. So just before we go too much further, some of the common misconceptions about climate is that it's all about energy. Uh-oh, hopefully you still can see my screen, sorry. So it's not just energy. Carrie, can you still see my screen? I'm sorry.
Yes, you're good.
Okay, sorry, I have my docking station just made weird noises. Anyways, okay, so climate is not just energy. Yes, a lot of the drivers of the situations that we're in now with this extreme weather are those greenhouse gases, but adaptation is another major piece. We don't know when the curve of those disasters might start to trend down, or the curve of greenhouse gases might start to trend down. And so adaptation is still something that we really need to look at and include in our planning process. And it really is a major connector between comprehensive planning and the public. And really, in this conversation, we'll talk about kind of that, the middle part of that Venn diagram, how education or local food systems or water conservation, things like that can play a role in helping you identify risk and identify vulnerabilities, and then really kind of harness that adaptive capacity a community might have. And so theory being, a lot of these solutions, again, can be woven into this process. And I would encourage, anyone who's in the planning realm to start picking, bringing climate in any way possible. And so we'll go over some of those ways in the next couple minutes. So, this thing's being weird. Okay, so we're going to talk about adaptation in the planning process straight away. So during the process, one, address the issue from the start. A lot of comprehensive plans, when they're going through their community profile, say we are in this climate classification, here in Central Iowa, we're in a continental climate and things like that. We're next to this river or these mountains or things like that. But we need to include some of the norms that have been coming up, some of the recent events. We'd be remiss if we didn't say in the last 2 years that we've had 2 derechos come through Central Iowa. And we'd also be remiss if we didn't talk about the projections of what things could be, and then address the uncertainty that is out there with this. Because again, we don't necessarily know what all hazards we're going to have. We have a really good idea and we're learning more each day. And we also don't know when that bell curve is going to start to go down. So starting to address those right there in the plan, right off the bat, just start saying its name and start putting it in there. Another one, and a good way to address this is while you're thinking about these things, what are those barriers that might be in the way for sustainable development, and how we can get climate adaptation into our plans and our communities a little bit more. And so identifying those and then incorporating those into the planning process throughout. And a great way to start doing that is by engaging new partners in new ways. So I'm not too far removed from grad school, but I do remember when we were going through it, you rent out a community center, you buy some food, put out some soda, and put out some generic invitations and say, hey, we're having a comprehensive planning process. We'd like for you to be involved. Please come to us. And so that doesn't necessarily always work. And you'll see that a lot of cities are kind of revamping how we do that. And I think that when we think about climate, there's a lot of really great ways to start integrating new and exciting ways to discuss a lot of the issues that we may have going forward. And some of those folks you might not have traditionally invited into the comprehensive planning process might include your disaster responders, your churches, who in a lot of cases, especially in the smaller towns, act as that kind of philanthropy branch of the community, providing, being a filter for donations, or being a housing for, in an emergency and things like that. Here in Iowa, we have established watershed management authorities. So that's a WMA there, that really are set to coordinate across our boundaries, our jurisdictional boundaries, and work on some of our natural resource issues, specifically here, waters, drought, and things like that. And so bringing them into the fold, how does their work play into this? Other examples, transit providers, your housing trust funds, even myself, I'm an MPO employee, so I always say, oh, hey, invite an MPO employee. But in a lot of cases, MPO or RPA employees are really sitting in the middle of a lot of these plans across a region. And so they can help to connect some of these things. But again, when we talk about comprehensive planning process, we do a lot of listening. We ask people questions and listen what they have to say about the future. But a lot of times we need to learn a little bit more together as well. Some of these things are going to be new, and each disaster might be different. And so take the opportunity to learn together. If there's a subject that keeps coming up, bring someone in and have a discussion with them, have them teach the community together how we can better deal with issues. So listening and learning is very important in all this. Data sets, we as planners love data, right? We have tons of data sets here at the MPO. We focus a lot on transportation and things like that. There are data sets out there that you don't necessarily need to dig up. And with climate, we really need to broaden what data is included. And so one of the places that I would say, especially in the climate realm, to start is with your hazard mitigation plan. Every county in Iowa and all across the United States has to update their hazard mitigation every plan every 5 years. And so that data is not going to be too far out of date and could be included in your comprehensive plan. It's a great way to start connecting those pieces, because when we talk about climate adaptation in comprehensive planning, a lot of it really is reducing those hazards. And so hazard mitigation plans can play into that. Climate data can be kind of intimidating as well. There's so much of it, and you might not necessarily know what all to include or the specifics. And so I just listed a couple here, and we'll talk about more tools and resources later on in this webinar. But here in Iowa, Iowa State University hosts pretty much I call it our weather hub. So you can go to the Iowa Mesonet and say, hey, I remember, in August of 2020, we had a big storm, and you can start to pull the data out and include that into your community profile and your planning process. Also, we have climate hubs through the USDA throughout the United States. Here in the Midwest, we have ours housed in Ames, Iowa State University. And the climate hubs are really there for more of that ag approach and how we can incorporate agriculture into climate adaptation and how farmers need to be pulled into this. And so I think here in Iowa, especially, really pulling in those agricultural pieces as well is important. And when we talk about climate, we know that there are inequities in how people are affected or, what their risks are and things like that. And so the National Risk Index or the Social Vulnerability Index and things like that are at a national level, you can easily pull out information and include that in your plan to start identifying what are those risks and hazards and things like that. And then I'll always put a plug in for the U.S. Resilience Toolkit. It's a great piece for communities to go through and get anything from graphs to new ideas, make connections to some of the experts in your area and things like that. And so if you haven't visited the U.S. Resilience Toolkit, please do. And the other one that I haven't put in there because it literally just came out is there are new state summaries for climate that just came out just I think it was last Thursday, they were released. And so those state summaries are out there. And I know that the U.S. Resilience Toolkit has a portal to it, and I can put a link in the chat later. But these places have those pieces of data that you're going to need to move this forward. And I think when we talk about climate, we're going to keep hearing this term adaptive capacity. And really that's the resilience that's built into your community, whether that's the organizations that jump in and help, whether that's people understanding where our vulnerable populations are and making sure that we put pipelines in to get that help there. And really that resilience is really built into our population and our community and the connections within it. And so identifying adaptive capacity and including that in your community profile can help you get a head start as well. So we are going to, so I am in Iowa. I'm the Iowa Climate Champion, born and raised. And so really we're going to start looking at this planning principles for the state of Iowa. But for those of you who might not be in our state, there are other principles that your state might ask to be taken into account. But really this is a pretty robust list of how we can start looking at comprehensive planning. And so I would say that in a lot of ways, most comprehensive plans that I see around the state of Iowa have all of these individual little nuggets here. It kind of looks like corn kernels or something like that, all of them separate. They each have their own separate chapter. And so my theory would be tear down the silos between those. Transportation definitely does impact housing, which impacts agriculture, which impacts sustainable design and occupation. Tear down the silos between those chapters and start building a barn over what is the comprehensive plan for the whole community and start connecting some of these pieces. And so that's what we'll spend the next couple minutes on, is looking at how we can kind of tear down these walls and bring things together. So I think when a lot of people think of mixed use, we hear this word a lot. I think it comes up in resilience and sustainability. It's very popular in current planning trends and things like that. I think this is what we think about, right? A Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's or something on the corner, and there's lofts above it. Of course, there's probably a pool and a patio up on that roof. But one of the things that I keep seeing here is that the cars continue to zoom by. So how mixed use is this? Yes, we can live there and we can shop there, but we're resting our head. Are we actually using the whole community? And I think when we think about Iowa in this term of mixed use, Iowa has traditionally been mixed use. Almost all of our small towns were a mixed use neighborhood at one point. And really with the automobile, we've been moving further away from that. And so how do we ingrain that back in there? How do we solidify that, this is what is better for our community when we have these connections, when we have interactions? Just think of the number of people that you could talk to as you're walking down the street compared to the other one before. And so when I was thinking about this, of course, being an Iowan, I think about Bill Bryson and the life and times of the Thunderbolt Kid. And his story really resonates with me because as a person born in Des Moines, I also, just like him, kind of traveled around the city and moved throughout the community and went to the movie theater all by myself and moved throughout and got to do all these things, went to the forest. And I really wasn't necessarily bound by where the highways were around me. And I think in a lot of cases, our children are feeling this effect of, we put housing in a certain place, but then there might be a highway and then there's a grocery store across the street. At what point do we encourage kids to go back to the grocery store or walk across the street? And how are we making these places safe for our community in the future? And so when we're thinking about adaptation, a lot of times when we think about mixed use, we think about adding retail to housing or transit and things like that. And that's great. And it is by no means should be negated in any way. But there are other ways to use our neighborhoods as well, right? So we could be stormwater managers on our own property. If you're here in Iowa, I suggest checking out raincampaign.org. Really, it's an effort that we're driving that's pushing for folks who have a home or property to start managing that stormwater, because right now a lot of our urban and suburban and even agriculture acts as a pervious surface or impervious surface, and we're exacerbating a lot of the flooding problems. So how can we break down the barriers to make permeable pavers or make bioswales or rain gardens in a community more ingrained and more traditional and natural to see there? Another one that you'll hear, and no, this is not just about energy, but while we think about adaptation, I think of the derecho and how a lot of us in the Des Moines Metro and across Central Iowa were without power for a while. If we start building into our power grid this mixed use, making sure that we can be a stormwater mitigator, we can be an energy producer, we'll talk about agriculture a little bit later. How do we mix these other uses and these other functions in there as well? And so when you're going through your comprehensive planning process, look at how your land use map or your zoning or your ordinances and codes and things like that might deter or be a barrier to people actually bringing this back. And so, we talked about the kids, mixed use neighborhoods really are, it's not just having a house next to a retail, it's really integrating all these things in. I myself used to walk to school. I live next to a school now, and I can tell you the drop-off line of cars is extremely long, and I rarely ever see many kids really walking to school, and that's for a good reason. We have an auto-centric society. Distracted driving is becoming more prominent, and so how do we deal with these things? And I am just going to make a little plug for the corner store again. So we used to walk down to the corner store and get a slice of pizza or some candy after school, and we really, in a lot of ways, our comprehensive planning and our land use and zoning deter us from having a neighborhood market here in Des Moines. Lynn's is pretty famous. I used to live down the street from a very old Casey's and things like that. So how do we really bring in these mixed uses and make our neighborhoods more complete? So commercial, again, this is not just about energy, but I'm just using this picture as an example. We can mix the use of commercial as well. So commercial property a lot of times is a 9 to 5. If it's a little bit more industrial, it might have extended hours, but really it functions in a different way. And so how can we make sure that it is also integrated into our climate resilience and our adaptation? And so you see here, the picture, the building on the left has a white roof compared to the black roof on the right. So that white roof reflects a lot of the sunlight or a lot of the heat back into the atmosphere, whereas black roofs hold that heat and help actually enable a urban heat line and things like that. And so how can we ingrain these resilient practices, including the solar panels here again, into our comprehensive plan? Parking lots are going to be a major piece, right? They are just how it is. I love driving my car. It's not feasible for me to take a bus or take a bike or walk everywhere. I like to switch it up and include multiple modes, but parking is going to be part of it. We can reduce vehicle miles traveled and things like that, but still at the core, some people are going to need to drive based on their scenario. And so how do we incorporate the parking lots into this climate adaptation? In this figure, you see that they chose solar panels. I think their employees are probably thankful that that top level has solar panels, because then their cars are shaded as well. But there's multiple ways. You can do green roofs, you can go underground, you could stack your parking. There's a lot of different ways to start looking at these things. And I think at this point, especially in central Iowa, we just assume a parking lot is a big flat open space right there in front of the building for easy access. And we can kind of rethink about that and how it could be maybe used in other scenarios as well. So this is just another example. Obviously, green roofs are very popular. This one is used for agriculture as well, a community garden within this space. We also see there that they have some passive lighting. So how can this mixed use commercial really start lowering our greenhouse gases, but adapting to become more resilient and part of the environment instead of just outside of it? And then, of course, I'd be remiss as an MPO employee if I didn't touch on transit here. Transit can help get your employees to their place of employment. You can get your customers there as well. Again, there can be different mode shares within that. Here in the Des Moines Metro, we're very lucky that our bus system, all the buses have a bike rack on the front. So I'm easily able to walk, bike, and take the bus to multiple different places and use that. So how can we really bring these in, and where are we placing the commercial? Isn't near transit lines. Transportation shouldn't just be a last thought of, okay, we put this here, how are we going to get people there? It's, okay, we need to get people to a business, how are we going to incorporate that in? So just reframing that thought a little bit. I love the idea of open streets. And so when I'm thinking about like mixed use community facilities, one is an open street event. Our streets are community facilities. They are ours. We use them, we drive fast or slow, and we get to where we need to go. But right here we have Southwest 9th and Des Moines did an open street event. And I would encourage that as you're going through the comprehensive planning process and you're looking for different ways to incorporate stakeholders, throw an open streets event. You can bring a lot of those stakeholders that we talked about earlier, the disaster responders, of the churches, the WMAs, transfer fighters, housing authorities, and things like that. You can bring them so then people can have a more comprehensive conversation as they're enjoying this space in a new way. And so, you know, streets are a community facility, so let's tap into those a little bit more and use them. Here in Iowa, we go through the extremes. So right now we're going through a cold snap. My hands are still cold from being outside about an hour ago. But we really have to use our community facilities as both their intended use, so like a public library and things like that, but also on the other side, as a cooling center or as a warming center right now. We keep having discussions about how we keep warming centers open, who has access to them, you know, things like that. And I think it's a conversation that every community needs to have before it gets cold. And so comprehensive planning process, it's a great time to do that. So Des Moines and Cedar Rapids and many community spaces have these green roofs. The one in Des Moines here on the public library is not accessible to the public. It's quite the it's quite the climb if you did want to get up there. But in Cedar Rapids, this is a great example of how we can use a roof and incorporate it into not only the public facility, but also into an educational space, an event space, and as a resource. So this is mitigating not only stormwater, but also urban heat island effects and things like that. And so really it's a multi-benefit factor there. And then I think that schools have some of the greatest potential in the comprehensive planning process. No, in a lot of cases, cities don't get to dictate what happens on a school property, but they can be brought into the process, can have those conversations and understand how a school grounds can play into this as well, and maybe even the education curriculum itself. So school gardens are a great opportunity to engage in both changing the landscape, so it's not just grass, but also engaging in maybe our food systems and things like that as well. So I'm running out of time, so I'm just gonna kind of quickly go through this, but we know that this is, especially in central Iowa, this is a typical street. It is a 4-lane plus turning lanes. There's not really any sidewalks, there's no trees. It really is just a thoroughfare to get people in and out of an area. And so these kinds of stroads are a hindrance in our climate adaptation, and they're a hindrance in how we get around. I would not want to send my child across that to go from, say, that Hy-Vee over there to the Kmart or something like that. And so how do we make sure that we are creating streets that also are able to be used in a variety of different ways? And one of the best ways to do that, I am a forester originally by training, and I can't say how important trees are to a community. It adds character, it adds that sustainable design, it provides shade and carbon sequestration. It really can create a safe space for people to feel more comfortable walking in an urban area. So really tap into trees. If I can send one thing with you today, is tap into trees. Trees can be a huge piece of the climate adaptation and mitigation pieces, and so really use that. And you can also see here, this street also has stormwater features built in as well, and then some traffic calming as well. You can see that road gets a little bit more narrow, so people slow down when they come to that intersection, and then they can be more aware of who might be at that intersection with them. As we keep talking about, mode shifts and how to get people out of the car, it's going to be harder because we do know that we are in an auto-centric society. I am guilty of distracted driving as well. And so having some sort of protection to help people kind of take that first step and start using a different mode of transportation, whether it's for recreation at first or for transportation, protection is very important. Here you can see that there's an actual curb there. There's all sorts of different ways to protect people who are using alternative forms of transportation. And so I'd encourage you to tap into those as well. And then I always throw in Thompson Avenue here in Des Moines, a beautiful sycamore lined street. I think it's a gem. I think it adds that character and sustainable design and things like that. And if you are here in Iowa, there is public transportation in every single county throughout our state. In the more urban areas, we do have those fixed route services, but in the more rural areas, you do have more door-to-door service. So as you're putting this comprehensive plan together, invite those partners in, identify who might need those transit services, and then help start to craft better transit services in your area. I know a lot of these agencies and their staff are eager to provide better services and are ready to have those conversations. So please don't hesitate to reach out to them. So agriculture, being from Iowa, we are an agriculture state, so I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about this real quick. We know that extreme weather is killing more crops. The derecho wiped them out. In 2012, we had droughts that wiped them out. And we are having to foot the bill in some way or another, whether it's at the grocery store, whether it's through the subsidies. This is becoming a more common occurrence. And even here in Iowa, we really had that Goldilocks climate, right? We had enough precipitation in the spring, and we had a drier fall and a nice summer that really let the corn flourish. But we are starting to lose that. We're seeing that our springs are a little bit more drier and our falls might be more wet. And so this is kind of starting to push and pull. And we know that a lot of farmers are starting to diversify their portfolios. They might have multiple different crop rotations. They might invite, a wind farm lease to come in. They might even bring in some livestock or something like that. We know that there is resilience within the farm. And we can also bring in agroforestry and bring in kind of that silviculture. And then of course, here in Iowa, if you're not aware of the STRIPS program, it's really bringing in biodiversity back to our fields. And so there's lots of programs like this. This one is based here in Iowa, but they're all over the nation. So it's really kind of bringing adaptation and resilience to those farms. We know that pollinators are a huge piece of our agriculture, and so building them into that space as well. Another quick example I'll give is Heartland Co-op here in Iowa is actually employing conservation agronomists. So agronomists who have been farmers before and see both sides of both conservation and farming, and having that conversation has been a little bit more easier for them because they already have relationships and they aren't necessarily, you know, the Soil and Water Conservation District or a planner from Des Moines or something like that. It is just a little bit more of a closer relationship there. And then when we think about our cities, how do we make sure that we're not putting up barriers for people to start growing their own foods? If our food systems are starting to have weaknesses, then we should start growing more of our own food within the community. And hoop houses keep coming up across the nation as, you know, one of these things where is it a permanent structure? Is it not a permanent structure? Where should it be? How tall should it be? And so really determining what your city's capacity is for that urban agriculture. Maybe it's hoop houses and maybe it's community gardens. Both can have their place within the urban landscape. So just because I'm running late on time, I'm going to skip that, but I just want to say that Iowa Smart Planning Principles are a great guide for how to include a lot of different pieces into your comprehensive plan, but they are just principles. And so we need to connect those and actually fill the gaps in between them. And when we do that, we can start to create a little bit more resilience in our communities. So just in summary, real quick, climate is complex, but it really is fundamental. It's created the landscape that we live in today, and integrating these planning areas together can help us create more resilient places. There is no cookie cutter that I'm offering you. Each city is different, and how they want to put together their solutions is up to them. There's tons of different ways out there. And so as you're going through these planning processes, see what works best for your community based on the goals and needs that you might have, and then plant some of those seeds in your comprehensive plan. So with that, Carrie, I'll throw it back to you and Abby, and I will take it over a little bit later.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Allison. Just a reminder, please go ahead and put your questions in the question and answer. You can make comments and so forth in the chat if you would like. And I'm going to turn it over to Abby Finis. Abby is with the Great Plains Institute. She is the senior energy planner there. She's worked with a number of communities around climate action plans and also how it ties into comprehensive planning. So we'll go ahead and turn it over to Abby to take the next piece. And again, please put your questions in the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carrie. So I'm Abby Finis with the Great Plains Institute, and I am going to highlight some case studies where we see cities that are including climate in their comprehensive plans, as well as what that means for translating that into climate action. So I'm with the Great Plains Institute. It is an energy nonprofit based in balmy Minneapolis, Minnesota. I think we doubled our temperature to 2 degrees in the time that we've been on this webinar. So our mission is to transform the energy system to benefit the economy, environment, and people. And I am on our communities team, where we work with all sorts of local governments, community residents, businesses to advance climate and energy work, primarily in Minnesota, but also throughout the Midwest, and as part of the Sustainable States Network nationally as well. And my role is to provide direct technical assistance to cities on climate and energy, especially in the planning space. So I'm going to give a quick overview of some of the context, some of the trends that we're seeing in cities. It's going to be a little bit Minnesota, Iowa centric, but I think it's certainly transferable to cities across the country. Then we'll look into some examples of a few cities that have included climate in their comprehensive plans, and then talk a bit about different approaches to climate action and what that looks like, from traditional kind of long plans that we've seen to more focused work plans, and then just actions, just, you know, selecting a handful of big ticket items that your city wants to focus on. So in Minnesota, we have some really good information on what cities have been doing around climate action. We have our Metropolitan Council, which is a little bit unique in the country in that every local jurisdiction is under the same timeline to complete their comprehensive plans, and that goes through an approval process with our regional government. And so they're able to collect all of this information. And in this last round, they reviewed all of the plans for these different elements of who's including solar, who's achieved Soul Smart designation, how many green subsidies are there in the metro area. The Met Council added a resilience chapter, which a number of cities took that as a pathway to include climate in their comprehensive plans. A number of cities, and these are not mutually exclusive, have want to complete an energy plan or a climate action plan. And so many of those, there's some overlap there from some of those cities. But we're really seeing cities embracing the concept of putting climate into their planning processes to prepare them to take action and to accelerate our approach to climate, whether it's mitigation from kind of the energy standpoint or adapting to be more resilient in the face of climate change. And here again, you can see, sorry, again, it's Minnesota based, but you can see that there's just a growing list of cities, both in metro areas, in rural areas that are driving climate action, that are doing energy plans. It's really on the radar of a lot of cities, and I think that we're seeing a lot of momentum here. Just in the last week or so, we have had 16 communities in Minnesota declare joint climate emergencies, and I think that we're going to see a handful more as the months go on. And I just, absent federal action, who's going to do the work, who's really going to take the helm? And it's really been local governments who have been doing that for the past decade and a little bit more. So thinking about climate and how you include that in your comp plan, as I just kind of showed, we're seeing that more. Cities are finding ways to include mitigation and resilience in their plans. You want to think about, how are you including it? Is there a dedicated section that is explicit about climate change and what you want to do about it? And or is it something that's integrated throughout your comp plan? Allison highlighted a number of different ways that you can think about it in different areas, and really talking about breaking down those silos and thinking about it as a more woven approach to your climate planning. And it also allows you to embed those climate goals into your long-term plans and gives you that policy foundation to support local climate action. So your staff, your elected officials kind of have the permission through the comprehensive plan to take bigger actions on addressing climate in your community. And it also allows you to reimagine city functions through a climate lens. There is a huge nexus between emissions and how we plan and develop our cities. And if we think about it through that lens, we can reimagine our cities to function for us, give us better and higher quality of life, and reduce emissions as kind of this additional benefit to how we develop our cities going forward. So I'll just run through a few quick examples of where cities are incorporating climate into their plan and have gone on to do some form of a climate action plan. So the first one is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And in Cedar Rapids, they have these 6 elements of their comprehensive plan, and they have climate kind of woven throughout each of these elements, but it's only really explicit in the one that is marked as green CR. So let's just walk through quickly how they're including different climate aspects, mitigation and adaptation throughout their comprehensive plan. So in their strengthen CR element, you can see here that they have an initiative based around creating a green building program. And that's a common action for addressing greenhouse gas emissions in our building stock. And so that's something that, wasn't probably included in the previous comprehensive plan and is something that we're seeing more of. Allison talked a lot about mixed use and how we can think about that as an approach to our land use and making it more climate friendly. And so that's something that's really important to Cedar Rapids, and they've done a lot of work in trying to encourage that infill development and create a denser urban core in their community so that they can have better walkability, they can have better transportation, and think through all of those things. And it's not, again, explicitly climate, but it is something that is more climate friendly than having that kind of low density, sprawling, single use land use that we've seen so much of for a while. And then here in the green CR, they're a bit more explicit about climate action and including direct initiatives that will address climate, whether through kind of resilience or mitigation efforts. And then you can see the last couple of bullets are to direct the city to prepare both a city operations climate action plan and to complete a climate action plan for the entire community. And then the last three elements, again, each include some climate related goals that are in there. And again, they're not always super explicit, but they are certainly related to a more climate friendly community. And when you'll see in a little bit, when they develop a climate action plan, they can really lean into the goals that exist in their comprehensive plan to transfer that into their more explicit climate action plan. So another example of a little bit of a smaller community, Duluth, Minnesota is up in northern Minnesota on Lake Superior. They were more explicit about climate action, including that in their plan, and they do have a dedicated chapter to climate, both mitigation and resilience, and have some specific actions to address that. They have their greenhouse gas inventory included in their comprehensive plan, and this has really allowed them to have the leverage to go forward, and they are in the process of developing a climate action plan right now, and really guide the city in how it wants to approach both reducing emissions and being more resilient to climate change. And then finally, just another example of, a smaller community, 16,000 on the Mississippi River. Also here in Minnesota is Red Wing, and they too were very explicit about including climate change in their most recent comprehensive plan. And they also include their greenhouse gas, their energy use, they include their solar resource and their wind resource in their plan, and have specific actions that are and goals that are directed toward climate. And so when you have these plans that, Duluth wants to reduce emissions 80% by 2050, Red Wing, I think, wants to be carbon neutral by 2040, they have the foundation to then go out and work on these plans that help them achieve those goals. So I'm gonna transition a little bit into, okay, you have a comprehensive plan, you have climate action in there. How do you actualize that? How do you move toward implementing some of these things? And so some of the considerations are, what kind of climate action plan do you want? Do you want to go ahead and make a parallel long range, long form climate action plan that tends to be the most common plan that we see cities working on? Do you want something that's shorter and has kind of a shorter time horizon, but is more focused, maybe feels more achievable? Or do you want to just kind of come up with an action list of things to kind of check off? What are some resources that are available for you? So there's state sustainability programs. We have a program, Green Step Cities in Minnesota, that is a list of best practices and has some climate specific actions that cities can take. Our Metropolitan Council is also working on actions to support cities in taking action. And then there's resources from USDN, ICLEI, APA, and just talking to other cities. Hey, what are you doing? Learning from their examples and implementing that in your own community. So when you're considering this, you want to think about what your time frame is, what your goals are. Are you going to include mitigation, resilience, adaptation, equity, all of those things? You want to focus on one area. What does that look like? Is it going to focus on city operations, or will this be an effort that that addresses emissions and resilience across the whole community? And then what are some of those priorities? Where do you want to start? What are people most interested in? Are there existing goals, policies, such as your comprehensive plan, that can be leveraged to drive action in your community? So for kind of the long-term climate action plan, I'll use the example of Cedar Rapids. So we saw their comprehensive plan where they had some mention of climate change, but were not as explicit necessarily as the other two communities. They ended up passing a climate resolution to complete a climate action plan. And it's a little bit more of a long form plan that is both looking out, what are we going to do over the next 10 years, but what are we also going to do over the next 30 years to achieve our goals. And so this one is maybe a little bit more of a hybrid approach where it's not a super long document, and it focuses on a set number of actions that are really concrete for the city to focus on in two goal areas. So the first goal area is that mitigation piece. How are we going to approach our city so that we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and achieve our reduction targets? And then the second area is focused on that resilient, making it more accessible and more resilient, and particularly for vulnerable populations. And so, I encourage you to check out the Community Climate Action Plan for Cedar Rapids, and each of the plans that I'll highlight here going forward. And think through, is this the kind of plan that is suitable for my city, or do I want something more focused? Do I want something more robust even? So just kind of think through those things and what is most appropriate for your city. And then another approach here is what I call a climate action work plan. And so this is just kind of more of an abbreviated approach to a full climate action plan. It's really looking at, what can we accomplish in a 5-year, a 10-year timeframe? How do we want to get started? What are some concrete projects that we're going to work on? And so an example here is the city of Red Wing. They're kind of perfect for it. It's a city of about 16,000, so not super big. They don't have a really big budget to do a really long, in-depth climate action plan. They did a ton of engagement around climate through their comprehensive plan, and so they were really able to inform what they wanted to do in this plan. And so this highlights just a handful of initiatives and actions that the city is working on taking between 2020 and 2025. Duluth decided to take a similar approach to doing the climate action work plan versus a really full long-term climate action plan. This is in draft form, so I can't totally share it right now, but this is broken up in 2 phases. And the first phase is really looking at how do we lay the foundation? How do we, one, kind of get our own house in order and work on our city operations? How do we think about strengthening community resilience through some of the programs that we're delivering? What are some of those policy barriers that we have in place? How can we comb through our zoning code and identify where there might be barriers or opportunities to enable climate action? And then kind of importantly is how are we gonna pay for this, and who's going to do the work? And so thinking through those elements. And then the number 5 here I really like is that they've identified a number of shovel-ready projects. We have the infrastructure funding that's going to be available that will help with infrastructure for both mitigation and resilience measures. So what are some really key big ticket things that we want to do so that we are ready when that federal funding comes down to the city level? And then the second phase is much shorter, but it's really, all right, we laid the foundation, we're ready to go. We really have to accelerate climate action if we're going to achieve our goals. And so what are some of those big program designs going to look like? How are we going to ensure that when we're building out infrastructure, that climate is integrated into that? We're thinking about the stormwater impacts, we're thinking about the freeze-thaw cycles, all of those kinds of things. And then how do we also support our community? How do we, work with neighborhoods and deliver what they want instead of just kind of pushing what the city wants to see there? And so here's just a quick look into what the Red Wing Climate Action Plan work plan looks like. So there's, I think there's 5 or 6 strategies, and then each strategy has 2 or 3 initiatives under it, and then some specific actions and resources to help the city move forward with those initiatives. And I think finally, I think this is my last slide. If you don't want to go through the process of developing a plan, I think that's totally okay. I have the example here of Maywood, New Jersey. They have a volunteer green team. It's a very small community. And they just want to know, hey, what can we do over the next year? How can we support the city? How can we as volunteers get out and do some specific things? And so we just put together a short little kind of to-do list for them to work on over the next year and start making these dents in renewable energy, making dents in city operations, and just kind of really building that momentum within the community, just to think more climate minded in their approach to their daily lives. So with that, I will wrap that up.
All right, thank you so much, Abby. We appreciate it. All right, again, don't forget to add your questions into the question and answer to the Q&A column. There's a lot of good stuff that's coming out. So I'm going to turn it back over to, now we're going to go through some different tools and resources that are available to you. So I'm going to turn it over to Allison again to walk through the development checklist. And then we'll go back to Abby real quick to talk about the RFP and how to develop an RFP to get a climate action plan. Then I'm going to talk about the new Resilient Iowa Communities program. And then Allison also has a climate tool kit to touch base on. So Allison, we'll go to you next.
Sounds good. Okay. Can you see my web browser?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we, through the APA Climate Champions program, have worked on a number of different documents and resources for you all to use as you are working through climate. And so apascd.com, I figured let's just go straight to the source. So you can just go to that website, and under resources, there's papers, policies, and guides. And so once you get in there, you'll see that obviously APA has a climate change policy guide. There's a new PAS report that should be coming out later this winter, early spring, about climate as well. That'll be up here as in this resource area as well later on. When we talked about the climate data, there's all this, but the one we're going to focus on right now is this climate development review checklist. Since, once you get through your planning process, of course. Okay, so really, sorry, that's my bad. So really, once you get through your climate planning process, we are, let me see, let me share this instead. This one, here we go. Okay, so once you get through your climate planning process, you've kind of set these goals and things like that. How are we going to actually bring this into the fold as we move through actually putting development on the ground, things like that? And so this model development checklist has literally been put together for just that. Sorry, my mouse is going to start playing games with me. But really at its core, it really asks, okay, so here are some of we use Climateopolis as kind of a general thing, but say, your city of Climateopolis has adopted goals. How do we want to integrate those in? And so when you're going through industrial or residential efficiencies and things like that, you can really kind of piecemeal, or not piecemeal, but really comprehensively think about, okay, do these commercial developments and all of these things contribute to the goal? Do we need more information? Does it not contribute to the goal? And really start to piece this together throughout the whole entire planning process, from concept in the planning, the actual plan writing, to actually putting things on the ground. And so I would encourage everyone to go and download this document, have a look at how it fits into your city. Some of your cities might not have a climate goal quite yet, but you might have, say, a stormwater goal, or stormwater best practices that you guys are implementing, and so those pieces can be easily substituted in here as well. Does commercial development help towards our goals of mitigating stormwater, or bettering our watershed, things like that? And it goes through your electrical grid, renewable energy, obviously fuels and electrifications, your transportation strategies as well, And then waste, of course, is always important as we continue to look for ways to reduce, reuse, and recycle going forward. And so again, yeah, Carrie put it in the chat here, apascd.com. It is the Sustainable Communities Division kind of homepage for APA, and up in the top right, you'll see resources, and it's under the guides, reviews, and documents, things like that. So definitely have a look at that. If you're in Iowa and you have questions, reach out to me. I'm your climate champion here. If you're not in Iowa, you're in a different state, there's climate champions all throughout the country. And so definitely check in with them and see how they can help you kind of walk through this if you need to amend it in any way. So that is just one of the many resources out there.
All right, thank you. And Abby, we'll go back over to you for the RFP process.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the disappearing Zoom bar, but I got it. So, you know, if there's a couple of ways if you want to approach either an RFP for a climate action, or sorry, a comprehensive plan that includes climate action. You know, make sure that you're explicit about that in the scope, that you have goals. You want to include that in there as well. If you are going out to hire somebody to do a climate action plan with you, here's just some things to think about to make sure I include in there. And I just did on the fly that we had the city of Climatopolis. I don't know if I spelled that the same way as you as Allison, but you know, we want to be carbon neutral by 2040. We're seeking a consultant to provide technical assistance. Elaborate on that. Give the background of, you know, what the story is that the city wants to share, what they're looking for in a consultant. Be sure to define the scope of the project. What are you looking for in a consulting? What are you hoping will be elements of the project? What does coordination and project management look like? What kind of information needs to be collected? Are those resources available? Do you have that information? Will there be some kind of an advisory body? What kind of community engagement will be involved in this process? Will there be presentations? If so, how many? To whom? And then, you know, just the process for developing the plan itself. Be really clear about the deliverables and what you want from the consultant. Define the roles. Who's going to do what? If you're set up where you have some more resources, where you just need maybe lighter assistance from the consultant, be clear about that. Say, hey, we have an intern. The intern can, you know, do a lot of digging and help out the data and collection of the background information, those kinds of things, versus we want the consultant to do all of that. Just be really clear about what you think the city can handle versus what you would like a consultant to do. Budgets are not always included in RFPs. That's okay. You will probably get a wide range of responses. The more clear you are on the scope, the probably closer those budgets are going to come back from the consultants. Make sure that your budget is matching the scope. So if you're asking for things that might be $100,000 scope, but you only have $30,000 available, then you'll have to kind of rethink what that scope looks like, and if the city can kind of pick up more of that, and vice versa. Maybe you have a small scope and you have a bigger budget, and so you can think about, you know, if there are more things that you want out of that you have a budget for. Also be really clear about the timeline. Do you want this to be a 6-month process, a year process, an 18-month process? Just make sure that you're kind of clear about that, and that also helps to inform the budget and the scale of the project. And so, you know, I think that this is intended to be for thinking about an RFP for a climate action plan, but any of these elements can be incorporated into an RFP for a comprehensive plan as well.
All right, thank you. All right, there is a question in the Q&A about how to convince elected officials who might not be supportive. And I'm sure both Allison and Abby have thoughts on this. From our perspective, I think finding out what is important to those elected officials and talking about this in those terms. I think we've seen, resiliency is very important here in Iowa. We've had a number of big storms and flooding that have been pretty serious, and communities definitely see the need that they have to do something different to address these. So those are, figuring out what the elected official cares about and maybe talking about it in those terms. We've also seen how sustainability incorporated into a community is really a big turning point for making communities not only more sustainable, but it's really helping communities thrive, and it's attracting new businesses, new employees, new families that want to live there. So a lot of the amenities that come with climate action and sustainability are amenities that people want. So there's different, so my suggestion is really find out what they care about and talk about it in those terms. I don't know, Abby or Allison, if either one of you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree. It really depends on, the person, what drives them. And unfortunately, I think that we find that disasters drive, after a disaster, there's infrastructure or physical or health impacts. And, that is pretty in their face at the time. And so, unfortunately, there's the saying that, don't let a good disaster go by. I really don't like that at all, but it really is one of the times, especially with climate and extreme weather and resilience and adaptation, things like that, that we can see how we need to make the changes, and then those can be uplifted a little bit more to our elected officials.
Yeah, I'll just add, getting community members involved, get involved in the or the comprehensive planning process, and make sure that everybody who's concerned about it is at the table, and bring more people to the table, because it's about more than climate change. It's about what kind of quality of life we want in our communities as well, and who's impacting from the negative externalities of how we go about in our cities now, who's next to the highway, all of those kinds of things. And in the slide with the Red Wing comprehensive plan, they had a survey where 86% of the respondents want the city to do something on climate change. And so those kinds of numbers are hard to deny when you're an elected official, and you can see that it's something overwhelming that your community wants to do. And Red Wing isn't, a left-wing liberal community. It's a pretty purple community. And so I think just really tapping into your community and building that support, and showing that support to your elected officials can go a long way.
Yeah, there's another question that's in the Q&A. I'm going to just touch base real quick on the Resilient Iowa Communities Program first, and then we'll get to the other question in there. So you heard Abby mention the Green Step Cities program in Minnesota. The state of Iowa is in the process of developing a program that's similar, called the Resilient Iowa Communities Program. It's run by the Center for Energy and Environmental Education up at UNI. And the goal really is to build a future where sustainability is a norm for every community across Iowa, no matter what the size is. Currently, it's governed by an advisory board that's made up of city and county staff, elected officials, state agencies, and nonprofits. Basically, how the program will work is to engage local governments, create and identify best practices, organize critical state actors, including, all the entities that I've mentioned already, and business partners and so forth. We'll work to tailor tools, best practices, resources, and campaigns to fit the needs of Iowa communities of all sizes. We'll support cities moving from pledges and plans to implementation by providing data, tools, training, technical assistance. developing a peer engagement for regional action. Right now, we have a number of cities who are part of the advisory team have volunteered to also play a role of mentoring and peer-to-peer learning with cities who want to do this. We will measure, reward, and track city progress. It's going to be based on 5 main categories of best practices: building and lighting, land use, transportation, environmental management, community and economic development. And participants can choose from a range of best practices that fit your communities and your particular goals. So though there'll be a menu of best practices, you only have to do a certain number of those practices under each category. And communities have the flexibility to pick what's going to work for them. And you also get credit for practices you've already conducted. We're in the process of kicking off a pilot. We're looking for 5 to 9 pilot communities to participate. We already have a few communities that have signed up to be part of the pilot. The pilot program will last for a year, and communities that go through the program will ask for feedback and input to help make the program even better. If you're interested, contact Cassandra Sunny, who is the program director. Her email address here, and we'll mention this later, but one of our next webinars, Cassie will be part of that also to talk about the new program. And so why don't we go ahead and get to the next question, is suggestions on, oh, maybe the other question was already answered about performance measurements. So if anybody's interested.
I just put a link to the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index, which is one that's pretty helpful. There's other, tools that are available that you could use, and looking to other cities and what they've done as well.
All right, great. And then Allison, did you want to mention real quick the climate toolbox, and then I will wrap it up after that.
Yeah, and I think that Rafiq, this might help with your question as well. A lot of these things are out there on the internet and we might not know where they are. And so, one of the things that we found that planners really need to have access to data. And so being part of the MPO here in Des Moines, I started to put together kind of this climate toolbox so that it was more easily accessible for folks to tap into, whether it's the climate data, the risk and vulnerabilities and key indicators and things like that. And so, this toolbox was crafted for Central Iowa and Iowa, and it keeps expanding as we keep going on and more information comes out. And, I have more time to learn how to actually develop a website and things like that. But when we're thinking about these, especially these key performance indicators, our climate data page really does have quite a bit of the access to some of these reports and things like that, but also a lot of the data sets that can help you develop your key performance indicators and how you want to measure these things. Again, the US climate resilience, there's all sorts of things. So Abby mentioned, the National Risk Index, there's Social Vulnerability Index. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. And so I've been trying to put as much in one spot as possible so folks have access to this. And so I'm going to, I'll put the link in the chat. I'm sorry, my docking station is, if you can hear it, it's kind of on the fritz. So I'm going to unplug it in a second. So I'm not going to share my screen, but I'll put a link in there so you can kind of see where you can start getting some of this information to help develop those performance indicators. Because I don't think, there are some blanket things we can put out there, but really, again, it really needs to be tailored to your community and what the performances are needed. And so I will put this in the chat. By all means, this is a public tool for people to use. I'll be updating things. Like I said, the state summaries, NOAA just put out the new state summaries. And the DOT, the federal US DOT just came out with another mapping portal that again kind of connects some of these, the National Risk Index and the social vulnerability with transportation incidents and things like that. And so this will continue to update. If you're not in Iowa, you might have a similar toolkit like this. The US Resilience Toolkit is a big one that people can access. So I'll start throwing a handful of things in the chat, and feel free to check them out. And I'll put my email in there if you have questions about them. I always tell people that the folks at these organizations that put these platforms together and put this data out there, they do want to talk to you about it. They want to make sure that people are using it. You know, we don't like to just put things on a shelf and nobody ever touch it. And so usually staff is really eager to talk about these things. So if you have a question with some of the data, do reach out to whatever organization and some of the staff there and inquire about it, because they're probably pretty eager to talk about it with you. So I'll start throwing some of these things in the chat for people.
You're muted, Carrie.
I thought I hit on mute. I'm sorry. So first, thank you everybody for joining us. I apologize for some of our technical glitches today. This, as I mentioned, this is part of a series of webinars. We do have some upcoming webinars that are planned. So one of them is developing and expanding sustainability programs in your city or county. We will have speakers who from various communities who currently have sustainability programs. And then Cassie Sony from the Resilient Iowa Communities Program will also be speaking at that. We will be having another transportation webinar, Beyond Electrification, looking at other local tools at reducing carbon footprint from transportation. We'll have an upcoming webinar on the infrastructure funding and what it can mean for your community and how it can be used. And we'd love to hear from you if there's other topics that are important to you that you'd like a webinar on. Please let us know. We can make it happen. And again, thank you all for being here, and check out 1000 Friends of Iowa, Great Plains Institute, and the Greater Des Moines or the Des Moines area MPO. Lots of resources for communities around sustainability, land use, and transportation issues. So thank you so much. We appreciate you being here, and we look forward to seeing you at another webinar. We will also send out the slides and the recording from today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.